I want to talk a little bit about Marjorie Taylor Greene because Marjorie Taylor Greene sat down with Megyn Kelly, the one and only Megyn Kelly, earlier this week and had what I thought was an absolutely fascinating conversation. So one clip in particular that I wanted to roll here is a little bit of the conversation about Israel, although honestly, I thought that was basically the least important part of the conversation. But if we roll it, I think it'll explain a little bit why I found the entire thing to be so compelling. So let's go ahead and roll S7 here.
For members of Congress, every single year, annually, Israel receives, and we have to vote on it, it's a yes or no vote, $3.8 billion in funding for Israel. We're $37 trillion in debt. Israel is less than $400 billion in debt, less than. If you're an Israeli citizen, you have government-funded health care, and you have government-funded college. So why is America having to give Israel $3.8 billion? So for me, I'm not anti-Israel. I'm not anti-any country. I've turned radically and unapologetically for America, just flat out for America. I'm like, I'm sorry, we don't have time to fund what you're doing. No, we don't. You guys are doing great.
If we had the extra, totally.
Yeah.
But we don't.
We don't have the money.
So you could extend that, obviously, based on the conversation, to potentially Ukraine. Brave fighters in Ukraine, awful invasion from Putin. But you could understand Marjorie Taylor Greene making the exact same version of that argument about Israel to Venezuela, where there's a troop buildup happening right now. Could potentially expand to Mexico, as the Trump administration is considering strikes on targets, cartel-related targets in Mexico. So we'll see where all of that goes. But the point is, there's so much attention dedicated to Marjorie Taylor Greene's position on Israel that I think some people lose sight of the fact that it's part of this much broader worldview for Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, who, by the way, Marjorie Taylor Greene, very, very supportive of Israel itself, but has a different opinion on what's happening right now, in U.S. policy right now. And there's an entirely different question or conversation to be had about American policies towards, again, Venezuela, Caribbean, Latin America in general, Ukraine, huge conversation to have about American policy in the lead up to the war in Ukraine and whether that means we have responsibility to help seek peace. That's not an unimportant part of this, but I think it's just really important. And I thought Megyn's interview with Marjorie Taylor Greene was so well done because she brought out Marjorie Taylor Greene's story. And Marjorie Taylor Greene's story is that she is the daughter of a Vietnam combat veteran who had a family business. MTG bought out her parents' family business, watching them pour everything into it for years and years, successful family business, and watched them struggle after Obamacare. And the mandate created problems for small businesses. If you are familiar with small businesses at all, you know that was a struggle, whether people loved Obama or hated Obama. You know that was a struggle for people in the small business world. And then she watched Republicans say they were going to repeal and replace it and failed to do that. And I thought Megyn bringing that out of Marjorie Taylor Greene was a testament to how important it is just to have these conversations and not ostracize and shut people out because you have been told they should be relegated to the fringes. And that's where Marjorie Taylor Greene in particular is interesting to me because my own position on her started to change a few years back. And I'd initially kind of dismissed her, like a lot of people, as unserious, but started to think sort of differently about that. Because no matter how often you get out of DC, no matter how often you get out of New York City, you can't really live entirely outside of the bubble. It's impossible. No matter how much you do it, it's impossible. And I think that really colors the way, this is like a bugaboo of mine, the media covers the House of Representatives, in particular the House of Representatives, which is literally supposed to be representative. You go back and read what the founders wrote about their intentions for the House of Representatives. And right or wrong, by the way, representative, right or wrong. And the reason for that is so that a Republican process, small R Republican process can play out. This is sort of the genius of the American system, the Western conception of what small R Republican government should look like, that deals with those disagreements in a just way that allows public sentiments to be reflected in the legislature, but also dealt with in the cooling saucer, right, of the Senate, and then in the executive position as well. So DC just has no tolerance, though, for people in the House of Representatives who are literally representing the American people that are, by the way, the journalists' consumers who they claim to be covering in many cases. And what first started to change how I saw Marjorie Taylor Greene was her explanation of why and how she got sucked into posting particularly 9/11 conspiracy theories, other conspiracy theories too. And, you know, the definition of conspiracy theory is overly broad and much abused. But with 9/11 in particular, a huge chunk of Americans, this is according to an American Enterprise Institute survey back in 2020, it was like 1 in 6 Americans believes that the Bush administration had advanced knowledge of the attacks. Separate conversation, tabling that, but 1 in 6 Americans believe that. You may think that position is totally wrong. You may think that position is utterly disqualifying, but it is not an unusual belief. And it is not relegated to insane asylums. And that, again, may be terrifying to you. You may think the fact that that's not relegated to people in insane asylums is awful, and a statement on that poorly aged essay by Hofstadter, the paranoid American mind. But we should talk about that sometime, how poorly that essay aged. But the fact of the matter is that we live in a very low institutional trust country, and the low institutional trust is rational. It is rational to have low trust in your institutions right now. That can then manifest in some ways that are irrational, because in a low institutional trust environment, people have no idea who to believe. Jamal Bowman of the Squad, by the way, also dabbled in some of these theories about 9/11. And interestingly enough, has since kind of walked away from them. And populists come from communities of low institutional trust. There was a survey that a lobbying firm did actually a couple of years ago that found the Squad and particularly the Freedom Caucus, but both of those. So the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the Freedom Caucus, members of those groups represent some of the poorest congressional districts in America, and moderates represent some of the wealthiest districts in America. It was a fascinating survey, but these are people who have lived the reasons that institutional trust is low in this country. Marjorie Taylor Greene, is not herself somebody who's struggling financially, but she definitely is from an area of the country where a lot of that is the case for many different people and has seen it. And by the way, you don't have to be from a disadvantaged community to know that it's rational to have low institutional trust right now. And that's another thing that the left has struggled to understand, and why it's lost, for example, some of the MAGA moms and people in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. But Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think, has been humbled in some ways since coming to DC. And I'd argue also since realizing what I and many other people have realized after spending enough time here, which is that not all conspiracy theories, of course, are false, but the real source of much evil is that this corruption begets laziness, and that laziness begets incompetence, right? There's almost sometimes an incompetence to even orchestrate something as devious and evil as many people will often accuse the government of doing. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think there is evil corruption here. I actually think it's worse than people realize. And the city just gets sort of numb to it, and it starts to feel banal. But it's just sort of petty corruption in many cases that becomes laziness, and that laziness then begets incompetence. And again, MTG told Megyn that she grew up the daughter of a Vietnam combat veteran, bought at her family's construction business, watched Republicans say they were repealing and replacing Obamacare, never do it, got involved in the party after she saw Donald Trump. And I think this was such an interesting part of her conversation with Megyn, which is that it was love at first sight for Marjorie Taylor Greene and MAGA. That she saw MAGA, and that just sort of put words to what she'd been feeling about the Republican Party. Saw Trump, and that just put words to what she was feeling about the Republican Party. And I've spent some time in like the, county party, Republican Party headquarters where I grew up. And when you talk to the lovely volunteers who bake cookies for people and spend their weekends making calls because they believe in, they'll tell you, America. A lot of times they detest Republicans, even though you'll find them at the Republican Party headquarters. They detest Republicans as much as Democrats detest Republicans because, again, they come from communities of low institutional trust. They've been lied to. The entire country at this point is basically a community of low institutional trust. And I just really, really think that Marjorie Taylor Greene is the closest person in Congress to the actual MAGA base. And when they were having that conversation, not just about Israel, but about American foreign policy versus American domestic policy, maybe that horrifies you. But the worst thing, if it does horrify you, actually, the worst thing you should do is ignore her. And actually, it shouldn't horrify you. It should be a source of great optimism. Because now, if you disagree with Marjorie Taylor Greene, you can defeat her in the congressional arena. But people are suffering. And she is genuinely listening. You might not like her answers, but she's genuinely listening. So to ignore her is to ignore the suffering, basically. That's what a lot of people ultimately end up doing when you ignore people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. So I wanted to weigh in on that because I thought the conversation was really, really helpful. And, we started the show with Ryan and we ended with Sean, Ryan Grimm and Sean Davis on the same show. And the last 5 or so years of my career has been, as someone on the right, who, comes from that strain of the right, the conservative movement, who detests the Republican Party as much as a lot of Democrats detest the Republican Party because they're as useless and as corrupt as a Democratic Party. As someone who comes from that strain, you look at the way people have reacted to Marjorie Taylor Greene or even someone talking to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and it's just the most unconstructive thing it's the most unconstructive reaction to try to shut down that conversation rather than have it. And, I get that all the time. I'm sure Brian's gotten that all the time, just for talking to me or talking to Sagar and Jetty. And, if you're someone in media right now who's willing to have those conversations, you do put up with a lot of nonsense. And we have, pretty cushy jobs. So that's not really the worst that can happen. But yeah, it does try to create these disincentives from talking to people you disagree with. And often when you talk to people you disagree with, you learn. And sometimes you learn that you actually are going to maybe change your position on something. And it's cliche, but it's true. And so I thought Marjorie Taylor Greene, I just wanted to say, I think she's actually truly representative more than anyone else in Congress of where the average MAGA Trump base voter is, the type of person that goes to rallies, the type of person that puts the MAGA flag in their yard, the type of person who's doing the grassroots activism. And that person is not insignificant, and that person is not categorically bad by any means. And there's something rational about their reaction to institutional failure. Did you know all chips and fries used to be cooked in tallow? Up until the 1990s, when big corporations switched to cheap processed seed oils. Disgusting. Today, seed oils make up 20% of the average American's daily calories. Recent studies have linked seed oils to metabolic health issues and inflammation, but Masa did something about it. You've heard me talk about this over the last couple of weeks. I love these chips. They created a delicious tortilla chip with just 3 ingredients and no seed oils: organic corn, sea salt, and 100% grass-fed beef tallow. I literally just ate some before I came up here. These chips avoid all the bad stuff. They taste so good. Masa is crunchier, tastier, and doesn't break in your guac. Snacking on Masa chips is nothing like eating regular chips. With Masa, you feel satisfied and light with no crash or bloat afterwards. And they're better. They just taste better too. The beef tallow makes the chips satiating so you won't find yourself uncontrollably binging and still feeling hungry afterwards. Masa chips is beloved by tens of thousands of customers and has been endorsed by industry-leading health and nutrition experts. I just saw my parents this weekend and brought them some. So if you're ready to give Masa a try, go to masachips.com/afterparty and use code afterparty for 25% off your first order. That's masachips.com/afterparty and code afterparty for 25% off your first order.